Welcome to the Food Startups Podcast.
Hey, and welcome to the Food Startups Podcast. We're at episode number 33. I am Danny Mikulitz, your co-host, and my buddy Matt Aaron is on the mic with me today, as per usual. Now, Matt, you just got back from an exhausting conference. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. We were expecting Tulum Cacao there, but I know you had some other things going on your end.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you have to say no to big opportunities to kind of make sure you're doing the day-to-day. And so last week was a real big week for me to start executing on some things, and I could not make it over to Bogota, unfortunately.
But yeah, Danny, I will tell you, I got just as much education as I did value from the conference. I made some great media contacts, sold a couple boxes of my product here, Panela Mix, and I learned a lot about putting on an event. I only had 5 days to prepare for this because it was a last-minute thing where I got the booth and everything setting up. So setting up a stand, getting the machines to serve the drinks, all that type of stuff in 4 to 5 days was really cool, and I learned so much.
Definitely. That sounds great, man. I can kind of, as I said, I can always kind of picture you just hustling around Bogota and spreading the good word. And so, Matt, yeah, I think this is the first or second time that you've shared with us on the air some pretty exciting news, just talking more about a brand that you've launched in Colombia. And so I'm definitely excited to kind of hear you share a little bit more about that. And also, yeah, I can just imagine the logistics of a beverage at a conference where you've got to be doing samples on a short notice. That's a challenge for a team of 5 or 10, let alone, I don't know, were you 2 or 3 people there?
Yeah, well, 2 people full-time, and then my 2 partners here in Colombia. One did the first half, and the other did the second half of the show. But I was there, got there at 10, left at 7. I had a great company help build the stand for me. And the waiter I hired, it wasn't the best. It was my first time doing it. I know what to look for next time, and there are a few problems with the machines. The power in the building that was being sent to the food stands, which were Nestle and our company, went out intermittently, so I wasn't able to serve all the variety of beverages I wanted to serve. I could only serve it cold, but I couldn't serve too many frappes or hot drinks. The next time I do an event, I already have a lot of promo gear made for this one, and I think I'm going to be a little bit better at choosing an event. I know what type of questions to ask before I commit to a trade show.
Excellent. I think trade shows are kind of like going on backpacking trips. You kind of have to do some vetting beforehand, and you always kind of screw up the first time around. And so it sounds like you did pretty well, but sometimes you don't know what to expect. You can bring, you worry about the wrong things. You can bring too much stuff or too little stuff, all these things. And then afterwards, you kind of set into a routine, perhaps.
Yeah. And it was really cool because like the media contacts I made and the people that put on the event were nice enough to give me a free booth because they wanted to have some startups there at the show. And so I invested about, let's say, $700 to $800. So a decent amount of money, maybe not a ton, but I learned so much, and I sold some boxes, got some media contacts. And if there was like a course on putting on a food event, I'm sure it would have costed around that type of money. So I'm glad I got to learn hands-on.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you get huge takeaways that only build with experience, I think. And you're going to be able to reuse some of the marketing material for another conference because maybe your costs go down in that respect.
Exactly. We got a banner. We got some great photos. And sometimes you don't know how well you do at a conference until you do all the follow-ups because we made some interesting contacts. Most of them won't turn into anything, but maybe that one article that we publish will get seen by the right person. So as we'll talk a little bit later, serendipity is really important, exposing yourself to some luck.
Now, so before we get started on the main topic of our show, something we want to talk about on air for a while, we just want to give you a little bit of a news clip, an interesting situation developing in the state of New Mexico. Now, we all know that the categories of gluten-free or XYZ-free, dairy-free, soy-free, GMO-free products have become very, very popular in the last few years. And whenever there's this new kind of standard, a lot of certifications come as a result. And these certifications are valuable. They give a value add to products. Companies are able to offer their products at different prices fundamentally. And it's been huge. And so now New Mexico as a state has launched a chili certification program because New Mexico chilies have this incredible reputation, and they add over something like $400 million a year to the local economies there. And so now they want to make sure that anyone who's stating that their chili is a New Mexico chili can't just say it's New Mexico style or can't actually grow it somewhere else. And we're kind of seeing that more and more and more, and it's exciting. And it also changes the way suppliers position their product, because if you know these certification procedures exist, you have to kind of deal with a whole slew of regulation. So wanted to share that with you guys. Now, Matt, you want to move on to the main topic?
Yeah, Danny, and I support New Mexico. I like when states or countries take pride in one of their products or crops that they grow. So New Mexico chili pepper is good for them, and I'm happy to hear about it.
Excellent. Yeah, I totally agree there. And we've seen that from Idaho potatoes to wine from France, where we see champagne and different kind of wines coming from different regions, really helps people kind of think about product in a more differentiated light.
That's right. So, guys, today we are going to talk about 8 self-limiting beliefs in the food biz and some tips to overcome them. Now, before we start, I want to identify who this most applies to. This is going to be for people that are really trying to go above and beyond, not just exist with a food business as a salary, but make an impact in whatever way they define that impact and offer something great for people to try.
Yeah, and importantly, we're going to talk about these beliefs in sort of chronological order. I think the reason is that if we think about the day one of our company, and then we think about where we are today, we evolve, our products evolve, our mindsets evolve. And in order to reach the highest heights, which Matt mentioned, we're looking at the most ambitious entrepreneurs that want to change industries. That's kind of what this is geared at, because it's very important to kind of have these game-changing entrepreneurs be in our context. If we don't think we have the skills yet, we want to make sure that we kind of know what's out there, that there are people that have grown industries from 0 to 1 billion to 5 billion. And so it's really fascinating, and we want to go through them chronologically because I think that's going to help the readers and the listeners get some value out of it.
Yeah, and speaking of reading, each of us is reading a book on a very, very successful and one of them being quite controversial entrepreneurs. Right now, I'm reading about Jess Jackson from the book A Man and His Mountain, and he created the Kendall Jackson wine empire.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating one. I've read the blurb, and you guys, I'm really looking forward to reading it, and I highly encourage you guys to check it out. Even just, we'll link to the Amazon blurb. You guys can get an idea about the character behind this company and this guy who risked all his savings and his money in, I think, his 50s, was it?
Yeah, this is a guy who had tons and tons of jobs. He was a cop, I think he was a model, a dishwasher, and then in his 50s, he has a law firm and decides to start growing grapes. He ends up building the Kendall Jackson wine business and transforms Californian wine to a source of pride and one of the top wine producing regions in the world.
And you know what's kind of cool? When folks get a little bit older and they're in their 50s, actually, that's when you typically kind of hear about a lot of self-limiting beliefs. People are really easily found believing like, oh, I'm too old for this. I can't do this or that. And look at this guy changing the game of an entire region with grapes. And I think it's really, really cool to kind of see and also to kind of remember as we go through some of our own self-limiting beliefs. And now, Matt, I've been talking to you about a book called Brewing Up a Business, which is written by the founder of Dogfish Head Craft Brewery, Sam Calagione. And this guy, Sam, it's fascinating to see the risks that he takes at a real young age and also kind of see him meet some of his self-limiting beliefs head on. I remember reading about as he was kind of nailing on the sign to his first craft brew pub, he saw the old signs of previously failed companies right behind his sign as he was mounting it on. And be able to go through that as he's risking all his money and taking out huge loans from the bank. Fascinating greed.
Wow, yeah. And I remember And how old is Sam?
Now, I think Sam started Dogfish Head in 1995 at age 24, 25. Okay, so he's probably in his young 40s right now.
Great. Well, we're going to link to those blurbs at foodstartupspodcast.com/limits, where you will find the summary and all links mentioned in this episode. So, Danny, let's start with belief number 1.
Excellent. All right, so I want to jump in and talk about a belief I encountered a lot when I was looking at creating a company in the cacao and chocolate space. And that belief is, my company sucks because I haven't shipped a container. I started doing a lot of work and research around this field by talking to a lot of larger companies and trying to get a sense for the industry. And I remember meeting and coming across different companies that have been around for over 100 or 200 years in cacao and in coffee, which I also had a strong interest in. And they talked to me about the number of containers they ship in a year. And I hadn't shipped anything at that point. And the thing is the great thing to take away is that sometimes I felt like a jackass, excuse my language, because I hadn't done anything at that point, but I was doing research. And so what I would do is I wanted to make sure and communicate to people, listen, I'm really serious about this. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, but I have big projections coming up. And in that way, I struggled a bit with understanding that, hey, listen, I hadn't done this yet. I hadn't kind of crossed this bridge yet with shipping out a container. It affected me for a while. But just kind of understanding that, listen, I shouldn't lie to myself. I shouldn't lie to other people. I was able to kind of take a healthier stance on it.
Yeah, and I would say from my perspective, you look at all of these successful companies today, and whether it's a container or full truckload, they had a great product before they shipped that first truckload.
Yeah, absolutely. And they took before they shipped their first truckload as well, they were also growing. They were making decisions and placing their bets and doing analysis before they kind of dove in. And so, listen, one huge thing for me, Matt, is like, and if you're going to sit yourself next to some of the biggest companies at the table, you can't have an unhealthy attitude about how small you are compared to them. Okay, because of course you're going to be smaller than them. If you want to be seated next to the best, at some point you're going to have to just be kind of looking up the hill.
Right on. Well, let's move on to number 2. And this is one of my beliefs. They said it won't work. So feedback from others, I think at the end of the day, maybe only the opinion of 2 to 5 people really matters. And for the others, either ignore their feedback or you take bits and pieces, or you look for trends where 20 or 30 people say the same thing, then maybe it's worth listening. But sometimes what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take a ingredient, a natural sweetener that is viewed in Colombia as something for the poor people, something for the lower class, and turn it into a premium gourmet product. And so a lot of times people see that. They're like, oh, you're taking this. This is just something that we don't value here. How are you going to turn that into a gourmet product? And I have plenty of reasons why that I can do that, but sometimes I hear that and it's quite discouraging.
Absolutely. And thinking that it's not going to work is, you got to be able to prove people wrong a lot of the time. And a lot of famous entrepreneurs, they got to where they were by having this drive to prove others wrong and also having that vision. So if you've got that vision and if you kind of know what it's based in and if you trust your gut, sometimes you might be onto something and then that opportunity is that much bigger. So if you're able to kind of shake that belief, I think a lot of folks have that belief. If you're able to kind of take a look at it, understand that you can turn it into an advantage because other folks won't do that same thing, then that's going to be great.
Good point. So, Danny, tell us the third self-limiting belief.
Awesome. Okay. This is something I come across a lot, and sometimes I kind of use it to negotiate with folks, but sometimes I also believe in it. All right. I will never make money in the food business. So food is a difficult business to be in because you're dealing with goods that a lot of times weigh a lot. They can be very dense, or they take up a lot of volume, and they're also perishable. You have huge risks that go against you when you're in this business, and the business is by definition almost a volume-heavy business. The biggest guys, the biggest companies, they just do tons of volume, and that's how they can grow, and that's how you turn to not being able to compete with them. And so what happens is that for me, whenever I'm shipping something in the United States, I sometimes have this mentality of, oh man, well, I'm never going to make any money. Customs fees are high. You have to deal with customs brokers, with shipping, not just air or sea, but also trucking fees. The fees just add up and up and up. And so at some point, I kind of got into the mentality of being like, well, hey, I'm never going to make money anyway. But at the same time, if I'm never going to make money, then that's a pretty pessimistic place to be in. You've got to be a little bit more positive and understand that, hey, well, sometimes if you kind of change your business model around, if you sell online, if you sell locally, if you sell on quality in a niche, you can generate the cash flow and generate the kind of terms you want.
Yeah, and Danny, number 4, and this is one of my beliefs that is similar to not being able to make money, but I don't have enough capital to make it big. Because you look at these big companies, just like you said, they have huge volume. They also have a lot of capital, or they usually have a lot more capital than you do. And so you say, great, even if I do get that big deal, am I going to have the money, and am I able to find the money to fulfill that big order? That can be a real problem. But as you've seen in the books about Dogfish Head and Kendall Jackson, they find ways to borrow money from friends, family, put up mortgages. And today, this is before their time, but we have things like Kickstarter, crowdsourcing. Another thing that you can do is side jobs. You have to be really creative. You have to be willing to live on a shoestring budget, which Jess Jackson did as well. And you have to be willing to wheel and deal. But yeah, that belief comes across. We're like, man, maybe I don't have enough capital. But I think at this point, if you can get a great idea and you can build some excitement around it, maybe, just maybe, you shouldn't even worry about not having enough capital and just have faith that you'll find a way to make it work.
Absolutely. And so, listen, it's a great example of looking at where you are and looking at where other big companies are and just kind of seeing this difference in capital, this difference in just kind of scale. And you just kind of have to understand that you take things one step at a time. And like you said, there are more ways than ever to kind of grow out a company that works and it's offering value to consumers these days. We talk about Shark Tank a lot as well, just to add in to list the number of different tools to kind of get funding. It's easier than ever before. And that's in addition to these traditional risky moves like putting up your house as collateral for a loan and things like that, which someone like the Dogfish founder did. So totally something that everyone kind of deals with.
A side note here, this isn't one of the self-limiting beliefs, but if it came to it, I have to admit, I'd be scared to run a Kickstarter for fear of failing. Can you imagine saying that you need $10,000 for your business to get machinery or whatever it is, and you only raise $1,200?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's tough. You got to make sure you can separate taking things personally from just understanding the value you're offering to the consumer and, breaking that down. But it's going to be, it's hard too, man. It's real hard. But at the same time, in the food industry, a lot of times products don't sell themselves. People say that, and especially these days where we have these kind of terms and these niches of craft and artisanal. So what I was trying to say is, yeah, you have to push out the sales, and it's actually a company. Things don't sell themselves these days, even if you think or it appears like they do. If you don't have the processes, if you don't have the business, if you don't have the passion and the drive to figure out best practices, then it's not going to work in the long run. You have to be able to kind of convert your effort into these things that reward your company financially. Now, Matt, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Let's get into self-limiting belief number 5. Okay, self-limiting belief number 5 is I'm not going to say anything because they know more than me and I'll just look stupid. Okay, now let me tell you a little bit more about this. Okay, sometimes when you're learning about specific things in the food industry, it could be just learning basic jargon. You're going to get people that raise an eyebrow to what you're saying because they might have 20 years more experience than you. The thing is that you might be afraid of kind of looking foolish, but sometimes the people on the other side of the table are the ones that might be stupid. Okay? And what that means is that the biggest companies in the world make basic mistakes, and especially when they're dealing with smaller clients. So Matt and I, if we're ever working with larger companies, we're going to be less valuable to them. And as a result, they'll be more prone to making mistakes. And if we're not ready to voice our complaints, voice the quality that we want, then we might get really, really, really bad quality in the goods or the services that we're buying. And I know that I've been skinned a few times with just not voicing my opinion when something's come up. Matt, does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, so I think it's almost like taking the experience over common sense. You see something, like even just bringing it up, and there could be a good reason, but bringing up and speaking up about these things. And I think when it comes to jargon, a lot of times you may feel like you have to show that you have more experience, and by asking them to explain the jargon, you show that you're an amateur. But I've found, after being on certain phone calls, especially with co-packers and being lost on the things they've talked about, that when you ask, they're happy to explain things to you. And it also makes so much more sense, because I couldn't think of anything more boneheaded than to not ask what seems like a very basic terminology is, and not knowing what it is and causing problems down the line.
Yeah, definitely. And so you had it right on the head. Common sense beats years and years of experience. Sometimes people ignore things, especially if there's not a big win ready for them. And as I said, that happens a lot with this small business, large business dynamic.
Yeah, or even, and this happens way too much, but the doctor is always right. There's tons and tons of stories where the doctor makes mistakes, or someone gets a certain type of disease or ailment where it's a very specific thing, and the patient studies it so much, and a doctor having to know about 500 different types of ailments and conditions, diseases, etc., that they end up giving helpful advice to the doctor, that if they would have just kept quiet, they would have had poorer treatment.
Absolutely. And I found that happens all the time. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are pretty good at kind of recognizing and calling BS on stuff like that. At least for me, when I started to realize what was going on in the world, and the fact that I couldn't rely on, say, my college degree or the Social Security that I'm paying, I started to question things, and that led me down to a path of really relying on myself and relying on, like I said, my own judgment and my common sense. So thankfully, entrepreneurs tend to be pretty good with that. But sometimes if you know less than other big companies, or if you have a few years less of experience, you'll still be reluctant.
Yeah. Now, related to number 5 is self-limiting belief number 6. And this is kind of a combination of either I'm not good enough or the competition is too strong. So this is something that I think most of us feel from time to time. And one of the most difficult parts is the survivorship bias, because we usually only read and hear about the successes, and not even just the boring, steady growth successes, but the super successes, the Richard Branson, Tim Ferriss, 2 books we're reading right now. We study from the best, but they're not necessarily representative of even 0.01% of successful entrepreneur population. And another bias that we come across is the publication bias. So these top writers and entrepreneurs and media figures, they share only the best. They don't share as many of their screw-ups as their successes. So even these super successful people to begin with, we're only hearing about their wins. Or if it's their losses, they do it in a way to show how they constructively learned from it and how they were so resourceful.
I think you hit on a really important point here when you talk about these different biases. And what I have to say in response is, 1, don't take things personally, and 2, find niches. Basically, you're looking at companies and entrepreneurs that are now big, and you can't compete with them in some levels. But on other levels, if you're competing with them on products that you have a passion for, products that they won't offer because they're too niche, then that's great, because that creates an opportunity for you. And then you can move into their fields later on once you have strong cash flow. It's hard, but I think that's a strong strategy, is to make sure you don't take things personally. Make sure you take things kind of one day at a time, as I've mentioned before. And that way you can you understand the media in many ways is just kind of trying to get eyeballs. And so Richard Branson brings more eyeballs than a low 7-figure entrepreneur or something like that. So you just got to be realistic and kind of know what's going on.
Yeah, and so with the competition, I think because of these biases and the skewed media and perception that we have, and tending to study the best and the most interesting is a quote that I read. I think it's from The Magic of Thinking Big, but I don't know for sure. I'll look this up later. But it's just never underestimate yourself and overestimate others. A lot of times we put other people on a pedestal, or we think that they just have something we don't, but it's really because they just decide to do it. They decide to start in spite of reasonably good reasons not to do it.
Absolutely, man. I think that's really well said. I think that's a great quote, too. You never underestimate yourself and overestimate others. Sometimes I find myself guilty of doing that big time. You never know the other side, and you kind of hype people up to being cooler than you are, having stronger cash flow, greater vision, even being more authentic. And that really hurts. It's just unhealthy thinking, man.
Yeah. Well, Danny, we have two more. What is number 7?
Number 7. Nobody wants my product. Once it's out, I can think of a million excuses as to what my product doesn't have without thinking about what it does have. And to be quite honest, that's just straight up unhealthy thinking about that. Because I've poured my heart and soul into things. You work months to figure things out and to get these big wins. And then finally, once they're there, you don't really value them. That's a shame. Okay. I've had to deal with that a lot because I always want things that are special. Okay. I want to create things that are special for people to experience and to appreciate. And so sometimes when I see that, listen, it might not be gluten-free. It might not be organic. It might not be kosher certified. I might get down on myself, especially because when you're selling to stores, a lot of times stores kind of try to negotiate with you or rebuff your product by saying, hey, well, listen, why isn't it this or why isn't it that? But you got to just say, hey, listen, well, here's what it is and here's why it's awesome.
Yeah. So it's almost like things are imperfect, and that's okay. And Danny, belief number 7 is related as well to number 8. My best is yet to come, so my product right now isn't as good as it could be. So what I mean by that is I see my product right now, and I know that I'm learning a lot about the industry I'm in, and it's going to get better. I'm going to figure out better ways to serve it. I'm going to have so many aha moments where I decide to change the flavor or the ingredients, etc., or the way I present and sell the product. Just like anything, like the winemaker, the beer maker that we read about, they kept innovating and keeping up with things, and all of a sudden their product gets better and better and better. So what I'm trying to say is, I know that 3 to 4 years from now, I'm going to be better with Panella. I feel like, well, if I'm not there right now, how can I sell in the present?
Interesting point, Matt. I think one way to kind of look at this, where you're saying your best is yet to come, is to kind of appreciate how you might actually be at your best and at your hungriest right now. If you look at Michael Jordan in the early 90s or in the late 80s before his titles, he was just more dominant, frankly. He was a different player, and he matured and changed in later years. But the thing was that he might have been at his best in those years. And so you might not be as a large of a company as you might want to be. You might not be the most sophisticated, the most polished in terms of how you're doing business. But at the same time, this might be the most exciting time in the ride for you. And a lot of entrepreneurs, they relish the moments where the day-to-day is uncertain, where you don't know if you're going to have a product in 2 weeks, where you don't have the cash flow. And I think it's because of that, because they know that, listen, my product might not be the best, but also I might be at my best. So I just kind of wanted to play devil's advocate and say, listen, here's a way to challenge and turn that around so that you're looking at yourself rather than your product and the status of your company.
Yeah. And I think in conclusion, a lot of times it's really tough because, Danny, I know, speaking for both of us, we have to take this seriously because you do have to be really good in what you do. But at the same time, it can be counterproductive if you're too serious and you're not having fun with it. And with all the things that have happened, we've both had plenty of funny mistakes happen, many of them being your own fault. But as you learn, you have to have that lighthearted, go-lucky attitude. And I think that's a missing piece for certain entrepreneurs.
Absolutely, absolutely. At the end of the day, I think that we look at our self-limiting beliefs. Personally, Matt, a lot of them come from just working too hard and then kind of culturing negative mindsets. I'm looking at competition. I'm looking at folks around me who are a few years ahead. I'm thinking that I'm not them, that sort of thing. And sometimes I think it's really important to be able to take a step back, do some reflection, continue to do planning. I had a few good conversations with folks earlier this week about just getting things done and that mentality and the kind of the mindset that getting things done cultures. And one of the things that's important is that getting things done talks about this rest day or this day on day 7 after you've executed a lot of stuff, where you take a look at things and you kind of reflect a little bit. And I think it's really important because we get into big ups and downs in our food companies, and we can kind of start culturing these negative mindsets, and then they can blow up and they might impede our success. Take the step back, take the space that you need, and then go after it again.
Right on, yeah. So, guys, please leave your comments on how you feel and respect all these things we've talked about. If we missed some things, if you don't agree, whatever it is. This is our first full-on beliefs and mindset podcast, so we're interested to see what you guys think of it, and we hope it's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that self-limiting beliefs are things that people face throughout their lives, without a doubt. But then they're pretty unique in the food business, especially because the food business really is built on big companies and then niche companies trying to get into the space. So you're dealing with a lot of kind of like inferiority complexes and things like that. Exciting to hear what you guys have to share. And leave your comments and make sure you guys can check us out at foodstarterspodcast.com/limits. Right, Matt?
That's right.
And as always, if you have any questions or comments, find us online at foodstartupspodcast.com.